Well, despite the public backlash, Just Stop Oil continues with its high-profile protests, arguing that they raise awareness of the severity of the climate crisis. Well, Chloe Naldrett is the spokesperson for and member of Just Stop Oil, and she says she's prepared to go to jail if it means protecting her children's futures. Well, we can talk to Chloe now. Thank you for being with us. So one of Just Stop Oil's tactics is blocking major roads, not allowing motorists to pass, resulting in some very intense clashes in the past. Let's just have a quick look at some of those.
Scumbags. Move, brother, move. Come on, move. Get out of the way! No! Move!
Clearly, enormous anger there. Do you think, looking at those pictures, your message is really getting through?
Apologies, I'm muted. Thank you very much for having me on. I think a couple of things. Firstly, I think we'd be having a different quality of conversation if we came onto programmes like this, and rather than you showing pictures like that of confrontation on the streets, you were showing the devastation that the climate crisis is wreaking on communities in this country and around the world right now. I think that would just set the tone very differently. And the second thing to say about those experiences on the streets is that's only really half the story. So yes, there is frustration, which we understand and are sympathetic towards, but there's also a huge amount of support. There's also people who will stand and will applaud as JSO supporters, Just Stop Oil supporters walk past. There are also people who stop and talk to us, people who frequently burst into tears and say thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for being brave, and thank you for standing here and doing the awkward, discomforting thing of raising the alarm. So, you know, there is a sort of slightly fuller picture to that. And I suppose what I would say is we're not trying to get elected. We're not trying to win a popularity contest. We are trying to sound the alarm because we are in such a short space of time now for us to do what's necessary. Yesterday, the 4th of July, was the hottest day that the planet has ever experienced. Global temperatures were at their highest. It's never been that hot in the whole of the history of humanity. And the record was set the previous day. So we've broken 2 heat records this week.
Sorry to interrupt you. Why does, though, interrupting something like Wimbledon, which your group did twice today, upsetting a lot of people who'd saved to go and watch that, interrupting the play, something that Suella Braverman has called selfish, why does that raise awareness of climate change?
Well, Robin, I'm here having this conversation with you this evening because that happened today. And, you know, we can sit here and we can discuss the tactics, or we can talk about the fact that our government is failing us. And I do wish that Suella Braverman and her colleagues in the Conservative Party would spend as much time dealing with this problem that is a risk to every single one of us in this country, rather than the extraordinary efforts that they seem to be going to try and stop these short-term temporary protests.
So we were just talking to Rob from the Climate Majority Group. That group doesn't think your tactics will work long-term because it basically alienates potential supporters. How would you react to that?
I think I don't disagree with anything that Rob was saying, but I think what he also said is that they're able to occupy this space because of the work that Just Stop Oil have been doing over the last year and a bit. He talked a little bit about the radical flank effect. There was a really interesting report last year that came out that said when groups like Just Stop Oil take this kind of radical action, what it does is it opens up the middle of the conversation for more people, and it opens up access to sort of more moderate climate groups, which is essentially what they're talking about having created here. So that space wouldn't be there if we hadn't been taking these kind of actions. You know, these kind of actions, they simply wouldn't be acceptable if we were in normal circumstances, but we're not. We're in extraordinary circumstances. Lord Debon, the Conservative peer that heads up the government's climate change committee, said last week, we are nowhere near where we should be. We're nowhere near making progress on our targets towards net zero. And net zero is, as we all know, far too late anyway, because the climate situation, the global heating that's happening now, will have run away with us before we get to that point. So our government is fundamentally not taking responsibility. And in continuing to license new oil and gas fields, they're essentially pursuing a course of climate genocide against everybody in this country and around the world. So you know, the action that we're taking is proportionate to the risk that we're facing.
Chloe Naldrett from Just Stop Oil, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Right, so let's bring in Wednesday night's first edition panel for their reaction. And with me tonight are political correspondent at Politics Joe Ava Santina and Conservative MP for Elmet and Rothwell, Alec Shelbrooke. Great to have you with us. So let's respond, if we can, just to what Chloe said there. This action is proportionate to the scale of the climate crisis. So if you were at Wimbledon today and you'd saved all year and you'd paid for your tickets and you were lining up for a fantastic day of tennis and it was interrupted, wouldn't you be alienated, perhaps, from the cause of Just Stop Oil? Wouldn't you just be a bit annoyed that they'd interrupted your day out and maybe then move away from the ideas that they're trying to espouse?
Yeah, I mean, quite possibly. But I mean, you know, Chloe does raise some quite interesting points there. You know, we are experiencing one of the hottest summers on record. I mean, we just saw, you know, potentially 40 degrees Celsius it's going to be this summer. I mean, that's extraordinarily hot and our infrastructure is not built for that. People do die from heat stroke in their homes. Our railways aren't able to cope with it. And we don't talk about that. And I'm sorry that, you know, a couple of people who were drinking their Pimm's at Wimbledon today stopped play for a couple of minutes. But she's right, you know, I mean, the government, they have issued a memo to say this isn't true, but there is rumours that they are ready to drop their 11.6 billion climate pledge. I mean, that's absolutely huge to drop green policies altogether. I mean, I think she's quite right to interrupt Wimbledon if that's the way we're going to go.
I mean, clearly there is an issue here that needs to be talked about, the climate crisis. Is action like this the right way to go about it?
Well, the funny thing is that I don't think when this happens, you get any stories around climate change. I think the story is the disruption that's caused and the inconvenience they bring to people and the anger that brews. And I think, you know, Ava makes a really important point she said about heat kills, but cold kills as well. And we have to be sensible in our approach. I've just sat on the energy bill at committee stage for the last month or so.
I just want to just draw our audience's attention to a picture from Wimbledon, which was the second interruption that happened today. British player Katie Boulter's match interrupted by those Just Stop Oil protesters. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm making the point that the idea that nobody knows about climate change unless they do this, I think, is laughable. I mean, you know, what happened to Greta Thunberg? What happened to the fact that we spent hundreds of millions of pounds hosting COP in this country? What happened to the fact that we were leading a lot of those areas and Europe has ignored us, America has ignored us, China has ignored us? I mean, it's almost as if the message is, it will only solve it if we do it here. And what's actually happening is we're moving so quickly to try and do things here that we're not going about it in a sensible way. Now, you know, I will have the debate, and it's probably not the time now to have the debate, but I'll have the debate on the floor of the House when report stage comes and third reading, that we do have to open up these oil and gas fields whilst we transition to net zero. I don't know anybody who doesn't want to get to net zero, but it has to come about in a way that isn't really going to destroy people who won't be able to afford the changes they need at that time. So when I look at these protests, I'm not thinking about climate change. I'm thinking about, quite frankly, these idiots who just keep ruining people's daily lives.
Gosh, that's quite a commitment to say that we're going to have to open new oil fields. But I mean, you know, that's not.
But that's in the bill. We've done that.
But also, it's not just the Conservatives' fault on that. This is like a long-term plan. Nuclear energy should have been thought about like way back when. I mean, you know,
totally
2006, agree. We should have been talking about it at least. Opening new oil and gas fields. I mean, we're going to be seeing more Just Stop Oil on our streets. As simple as.
But I think we can all
licences are there in the bill.
I was going to say we can all probably agree that we should be talking more about the climate crisis. You mentioned Greta Thunberg. Well, she took direct action in her school strike, and she's sort of become a respected figure in the climate movement. Why can't Just Stop Oil take a leaf out of her book, Ava?
Well, I completely agree. I mean, do you know what? I actually think that Just Stop Oil have done exactly what we've asked them to do. I think when they were on the roads, it was getting tiresome and it was becoming quite the spectacle and people couldn't get to work and it was affecting working class people in a way that I actually find quite deplorable.
Well, I saw something like that in my local area. I actually saw Just Stop Oil protest, people trying to get to work, people trying to get to school, and actually some local people got into the road and pushed which clearly they shouldn't have done, pushed them physically off the road because they wanted to get on with their lives, and it just caused enormous anger. I mean, quite shocking to see, actually.
Yeah, but I like seeing them here, and also it's quite incredible that they keep getting tickets. I mean, how have they got into Wimbledon, the Ashes? They're everywhere.
I want tickets to Wimbledon. How have they done it?
Absolutely.
I suggest they're well funded.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I would agree with that.
You suggest that they've earned their money using all the things they now want everybody else to stop using.
Yes, and they do. Some of them are slightly posh, I have to say. They have more connections, maybe, than some of us.
So we need to talk more about it, but perhaps, you know, this new climate group who are talking about talking the truth, rather than and taking meaningful action
But I
might be
find
another
it
more
incredible, the
approachable way.
conversation, because we are talking about it, the energy bill, which has a lot of, it's hundreds of pages. I've just been through it line by line in committee. This is a live bill which came from the Lords down to the Commons, and we've done it, it's going back to the Lords. It's happening. But the idea that it's the UK alone is going to solve climate change, I mean, there's lots of things to do. There's hydrogen combustion, something I've been talking about, not just electric vehicles. There's a lot of problems with that. It's about maybe what the Icelandics are doing, where they're actually sucking carbon dioxide out of the air mechanically. There are so many other things to look at. When you listen to the interview there, it was almost like it's all the UK's fault and only the UK can solve it.
But so you've got this bill. Is this going to be the solution? Great to talk about it, but clearly answers need to be found. Is this it?
Well, the bill lays, it's probably a bill which will be part of decades of policy. It lays all that down now in terms of licensing, and that's in hydrogen, that's in electricity storage, all sorts of things are laid down in this bill. It's, you know, legislation takes time. This is happening now. So saying the government aren't doing it, they're literally laying down the laws that will help for decades of doing this policy.
Sure, but also money needs to be put down, right? We need to start seeing investment in nuclear energy, and that's a huge sum of money. And yes, it's very difficult for a Prime Minister who's currently overseeing the inflation at the skyrocketing levels as it is to, tell the country we're about to spend, how many billions?
But I completely agree with you on this. And the fact is that when nuclear power stations were cancelled by Nick Clegg in 2012, because he said they won't come online till 2022, well, that would have been quite helpful. But the bit everybody forgets is that was the same conversation, really, that we're having now, saying you cannot do nuclear. It's terrible. It will kill the planet. That was the conversation. It was very popular to cancel that then. And there's never been sort of a sensible conversation. I'd love to see. France have about 57 nuclear power stations. And the idea that if something went wrong on the coast of northern France, it wouldn't affect us is laughable. But it is the way forward. But there's just been so much hysteria over the years to different forms of energy. And I'm afraid I want net zero. I want to be able to move to that. But to just say to people, sorry, we're just cutting your gas off, cutting your petrol off, all that sort of stuff, and it's going to cost you a fortune, but tough luck. I mean, you, Les, in the city.
Oh, well, that's a hot... Well,
let's not get
on
you,
Les. We'll be here all night.
It's the same thing.
I will partially agree with you and say that electric vehicles, there was no new infrastructure put in with them, and most of the energy that powers those electric vehicles comes from the grid anyway, so they aren't actually as efficient as we
And
like
there
them
are
to be.
alternatives like hydrogen combustion.
Right, more from Alec and Ava in just a minute, but coming up, an in-depth look at tomorrow's papers with our panel, of course, and as the...